Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast, everyone. Today we're going on a bit of a journey, a deep dive, you could say. We're going to be exploring the world of the Qur'an, but specifically as seen through the eyes of, well, the earliest Muslims.
That's right.
And we're using a very special text as our guide for this, the Muwatta Imam Malik.
Specifically Book 15, which focuses on the Qur'an.
Exactly. And I have to say, going through this book, I was really struck by, I guess you could say, how much it reveals about how the very first generations of Muslims, how they understood and practiced their faith.
It really is incredible when you think about it. Imam Malik, he was a leading scholar of his time, and he compiled these hadiths, these sayings and stories of the Prophet Muhammad, which gives us this incredible window into, like, the earliest days of Islam.
It really is like holding a piece of history in your hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I have to admit, as I was reading through Book 15, some of the things I came across really surprised me.
Oh, like what?
Well, for example, I had no idea that there were specific rules about who could touch the Qur'an. I never even thought about that before.
Well, that's one of the first things that Imam Malik actually addresses in this book.
Really?
Yeah, he actually includes a letter from the Prophet Muhammad himself addressed to Amr ibn Hazm, who was a governor in Yemen at the time.
Okay.
And in this letter, the Prophet very clearly states that only those in a state of ritual purity should touch the Qur'an.
Okay, so before we go any further, can we maybe break that down a bit for our listeners? What exactly does ritual purity mean in this context?
Sure. So in Islam, ritual purity is achieved through what's called wudu.
Wudu.
Right. It's a specific way of washing parts of the body with water.
Yeah.
And it's a way of preparing yourself, both physically and spiritually, for prayer, for touch the Qur'an, and for other acts of worship.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, before you even pick up a copy of the Qur'an, you need to have performed wudu.
That's the general understanding, yes. And it's important to note that it's not just about avoiding, like, physical dirt. It's also a sign of respect, of reverence for the words of God, for the divine revelation that's contained within the Qur'an.
That's really beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about, well, how we interact with the Qur'an today. Like, do we approach it with that same level of reverence and intention?
That's a great question to reflect on, for sure. And, Imam Malik doesn't stop at just touching the Qur'an. He also addresses the question of carrying it.
Oh, that's interesting. So let's say someone needs to transport the Qur'an from one place to another.
Right.
Does the same rule about wudu apply?
According to Imam Malik, carrying the Qur'an without wudu, even if it's in a bag or on a cushion, is also disapproved of.
Wow.
And the reason behind this isn't necessarily about physical purity.
Really?
Yeah, it's more about maintaining that sense of respect, of honor for the Qur'an.
So it's not just about avoiding physical contact. It's about approaching the Qur'an with a certain, mindset, a certain level of awareness.
Exactly. Imagine, carrying something precious to you, something that you hold dear. You wouldn't just toss it around carelessly, right? You would want to handle it with care, with respect.
Of course.
And for Muslims, the Qur'an is the most precious of things. It's the word of God, the ultimate guidance for life.
That really puts things into perspective.
It does.
Now, there's another story in the Muwatta that I wanted to ask you about, and it involves Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the, most well-known companions of the Prophet.
Okay.
And, well, the story goes that he was reciting the Qur'an after relieving himself, and someone questioned him about it.
Ah, yes. That's a story that sparks a lot of discussion.
I can imagine.
About the different ways we interact with the Qur'an.
Right.
So in this case, Umar clarified that reciting from memory, it doesn't actually require wudu.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's the act of physically touching the book that necessitates that ritual purity.
So there's a distinction between engaging with the physical words on the page and reciting what you've already memorized.
Precisely.
Fascinating.
And this distinction has actually led to different interpretations and opinions among the various schools of thought in Islamic jurisprudence.
It's a reminder that even within a shared faith, there can be, nuanced understandings and approaches to practice.
Absolutely.
Okay, now, let's shift gears just a bit.
Sure.
I was really intrigued by how the Muwatta addresses the practice of, dividing the Qur'an for reading.
Yeah.
It talks about these concepts like his and Jews, which I have to admit I wasn't super familiar with.
Those terms can sound a bit technical, but they're really just ways of dividing the Qur'an into smaller portions to make it easier to read and memorize over a period of time.
Okay.
It's like, breaking a long book into chapters or sections.
Makes sense.
So a juz is a larger division. It usually contains around 20 pages, while a shiz is half of a juz.
So it's like setting reading goals.
Right.
But what I found really fascinating is that the Muwatta presents different opinions on like what the ideal pace is for reading the Quran.
That's right. You have Umar ibn al-Khattab, who emphasized consistency, saying that a Muslim shouldn't miss their nightly portion of recitation.
So that's more of a structured approach, aiming to complete the entire Quran within a specific time frame.
Exactly.
But then you also have Zayd ibn Thabit, who, he was actually involved in compiling the Quran after the Prophet's death.
That's right.
And he preferred a much slower pace. He actually advocated for completing the recitation in 2 weeks or even 10 days.
Yeah, so Zayd's approach really emphasizes reflection and contemplation.
Okay.
It's about savoring the words, pondering their meaning, and really letting them sink in.
It's amazing to see this, like diversity of approaches, even among the earliest generations of Muslims.
It is.
It challenges that idea that there's only one right way to engage with the Quran.
Absolutely. It really shows that the emphasis is on finding what works best for you for your own spiritual journey. Whether you prefer a structured schedule or a slower, more contemplative pace, the goal is to connect with the message of the Quran, to let its wisdom guide your heart and your mind.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
I think that's a great place to
take a break.
Yeah, take a break. We'll be back with more from the Muwatta Imam Malik right after this.
Sounds good. It's really interesting how those early approaches to reading the Quran, they still resonate with us today.
They do.
Some people really thrive on that daily consistency.
Right.
While others, they find a deeper meaning in that slower, more reflective reading.
Exactly. And it seems like that same spirit of, flexibility and personal connection, it comes up again when Imam Malik talks about the different ways that the Quran was revealed.
Oh, right.
And this story involving Hisham ibn Hakim and Surah al-Furqan, it just blew my mind.
It's a classic example of how the Prophet, clarified these seemingly conflicting interpretations.
Yeah.
So you have Hisham, and he's reciting Surah al-Furqan, but in a way that Umar ibn al-Khattab, who, was known for his strict adherence to the Prophet's teachings,
Right.
had never heard before.
And Umar was ready to challenge him right there on the spot.
Oh.
But he decided to wait until after the prayer.
Talk about tension.
Oh, I know. It's like, can you imagine being in Hisham's shoes?
Oh, yeah.
Being questioned by Umar, like right in front of the Prophet?
One of the most influential figures in the early Muslim community.
I know.
It's intense.
But here's where it gets amazing.
Yeah.
The Prophet, he confirms that both recitations are valid.
Wow.
And he reveals that the Quran was revealed in 7 different ways.
7 different ways.
Yeah. It's such a powerful moment, I think.
It is.
Like the Prophet is demonstrating that there isn't just one rigid way to recite the Quran.
Right. So these 7 ways, they actually refer to variations in dialect, reading styles, and even grammatical structures, all of which, existed in those diverse Arab tribes at the time.
So it's kind of like acknowledging different accents or ways of phrasing things.
Yeah.
But the core meaning remains the same.
Exactly.
That's so interesting.
And this flexibility, it wasn't accidental.
Wow.
It was actually a way to ensure that the Quran could be accessed and understood by people from all different backgrounds,
For a while.
bridging those cultural and linguistic differences.
It's a powerful message about inclusivity and accessibility,
Yeah.
which, feels incredibly relevant even today,
It does.
especially in a world where the Quran is, recited and studied in so many different languages and contexts.
It really challenges us to think beyond, that singular fixed understanding of the text.
It does.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
I found the Muwatta's emphasis on remembering and internalizing the Quran to be, particularly impactful.
Okay.
There's this really striking hadith
Oh, yeah.
that compares someone knowledgeable in the Quran to a man with a hobbled camel.
A hobbled camel. Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Right. So how does that connect to remembering the Quran?
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow.
So the hadith explains that just as a camel needs constant care to stay put, knowledge of the Quran requires continuous effort and practice.
Oh, okay.
It's not something you just learn once and then you forget about it.
Right.
You have to nurture it, review it, and let it shape your life.
It's like the knowledge is this valuable treasure, but it needs to be like secured and tended to so that it doesn't wander off.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And it actually reminds me of Aisha's account of the prophet's experience during Revelation.
Okay.
She described him sweating profusely,
Really?
even on cold days, while he
Yeah.
was receiving the words of the Qur'an,
Wow.
which speaks to the profound impact it had on him, both physically and spiritually.
It wasn't just some passive process of dictation.
No.
The revelation of the Qur'an was this deeply transformative experience
Absolutely.
for the prophet. It makes you wonder, like, why is it so crucial for us to internalize the Qur'an today?
It's a good question.
What does it tell us about its power?
Well, it's about recognizing that the Qur'an, it's not just a book to be read. It's a guide to be lived, internalizing its message, reflecting on its wisdom, and striving to actually embody its values.
Yeah.
That's where its true power lies.
It becomes a source of strength and guidance and comfort in every aspect of our lives.
Exactly.
Now, onto a practice that might be less familiar to some of our listeners,
Okay.
the prostration of the Qur'an.
Right.
I have to admit, I didn't know much about this before diving into the Muwatta.
Well, it's a beautiful act of humility
Yeah.
and submission to God.
Okay.
It involves prostrating during the recitation or hearing of specific verses in the Qur'an that actually mention prostration.
Oh, okay.
It's like a physical manifestation of that awe and reverence we feel when we encounter these powerful passages.
The Muwatta mentions several companions of the Prophet performing this prostration,
It does.
which shows us that it was a practice established, during his lifetime.
Right, and Imam Malik goes into quite a bit of detail.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, about the etiquette surrounding this practice.
Okay.
For instance, he mentions that one shouldn't prostrate during Friday sermons
Okay.
or immediately after the obligatory prayers of Fajr and Asr.
So the dawn and afternoon prayers,
Right.
these specific rulings, they help us, understand the nuances
Yeah.
of this act and how it fits within, that broader framework of Islamic rituals.
Exactly. It highlights that balance between individual devotion and communal harmony that's so central to Islam.
Now, the Muwatta also delves into the virtues of reciting certain chapters of the Qur'an.
It does.
And one story that really stood out to me was about a man who continuously recited Surah Al-Ikhlas.
Oh, you mean the short one that begins with, say, he is the one and only.
That's the one. And this man, he kept reciting it repeatedly.
Mm.
And when this was mentioned to the Prophet, he said that reciting it 3 times is equivalent to reciting the entire Qur'an.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really is.
It speaks to the profound significance of
Yeah.
this seemingly simple surah.
Right. Just 4 verses.
Yeah.
And yet they encapsulate the core of Islamic monotheism, affirming God's absolute oneness, his uniqueness, and his freedom from any partners or associates.
It's amazing how much meaning and theological weight is packed into those 4 verses.
It really is. It's incredible.
And there's another heartwarming story about Abu Huraira, a companion known for his vast knowledge of hadith.
Okay.
He overheard someone reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas, and the Prophet told Abu Huraira that the person reciting this surah, they're guaranteed paradise.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful and reassuring message.
It is.
It makes you think about the profound impact that even the shortest surahs can have
Yeah,
on our hearts and minds.
they really can.
And these stories also beautifully illustrate the importance of, deer,
Right.
the remembrance of God.
Yeah. Dhikr is more than just reciting words.
Mm-hmm.
It's about cultivating this constant awareness of God's presence in our lives.
Right, like taking a moment to pause, to acknowledge God's greatness, and to express gratitude for his blessings.
Exactly. And through dhikr, we purify our hearts, we increase our faith, and we draw closer to God.
It's a practice that, it nourishes our souls,
It does.
It brings a sense of peace and tranquility to our lives.
Even amidst the busyness of our modern world.
Exactly. It's a beautiful reminder to be more mindful, more present, and more connected to something greater than ourselves.
I love that.
And speaking of connection,
Yeah.
the Muwatta also delves into the topic of dua,
Ah, yes. Do it.
which is that direct line of communication we have with God.
It's like having this private conversation with the creator of the universe, a space where we can share our hopes, our fears, our joys, and our sorrows, knowing that he hears and understands.
It's beautifully said.
And the Muwatta, it gives us this incredible insight into the Prophet's own approach to dua.
Oh, I'm curious about that. What does it say?
Well, one story that really resonated with me was about the Prophet's desire to actually save his own special dua
Oh, wow.
as intercession for his community on the Day of Judgment.
It's amazing.
It shows you just how much importance he placed on dua
Yeah.
and its power to actually benefit others even beyond this life.
It's a testament to his profound love and concern for his followers.
Absolutely. And the Muwatta also shares, specific du'as.
How does it?
Yeah, taught by the Prophet for various situations, like
yeah.
seeking refuge from the torment of hellfire,
Okay.
protection from the trials of life and death,
Right.
and guidance in making righteous decisions.
So these examples, they provide us with like a framework
Yes, they do.
for how to approach dua, what kind of language to use, what matters we can bring before God.
Exactly.
But the Muwatta goes even deeper. It gives us these glimpses
It does.
into the Prophet's own personal practice of dua.
We see his heartfelt supplications during his late-night prayers.
Those moments of like quiet intimacy with God.
Yeah, and on the day of Arafah, which is a day of, immense spiritual significance in Islam.
These moments, they kind of paint this picture
They do.
of a man who was deeply connected to his Lord,
Right.
seeking his guidance, his mercy, and his forgiveness.
And these glimpses into the Prophet's life, they're so powerful
They are.
because they show us the sincerity, the humility, the vulnerability that should characterize our own approach to dua.
Right. It's not just about reciting words, it's about pouring our hearts out to God,
Yeah.
knowing that he is always there to listen.
And what's really fascinating is that the Muwatta doesn't just tell us about the importance of dua. It actually gives us practical guidance on how to make dua more effectively.
So it's not just about the what of dua,
Right.
but also the how.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
There's a hadith, for instance, where Abdullah ibn Umar, he actually discourages people from pointing with both fingers
Yeah.
while making dua.
That's such a specific detail.
Um,
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's about maintaining humility and respect in our posture when we're addressing God.
Makes sense.
It's a subtle reminder that we are coming before the Almighty, the creator of all things, and our physical actions should reflect that reverence.
It makes you think about how even the smallest gestures, they can impact our spiritual practice
They can.
and the way we connect with the divine.
Absolutely.
Now, there's another beautiful statement in the Muwatta by said Ibn al-Musayyab,
Oh, yes?
and he said that a son's dua can benefit his deceased father.
That's such a touching sentiment.
It is.
It speaks to the interconnectedness of our lives
Yeah.
and the enduring bonds of family.
Even beyond death.
Exactly.
It's a powerful reminder to remember our loved ones in our prayers and to recognize that our actions can have this ripple effect
Yeah.
that extends beyond our own existence.
Absolutely.
Now, the Muwatta also addresses practical questions about, the volume of our dua. Like, should we whisper? Should we be loud? What's the appropriate approach?
It's a good question. And, the Prophet Muhammad, he actually advised against being too loud or too silent in our duas.
Okay.
He emphasized finding a middle ground, a balance between sincerity and discretion.
So it's about being genuine and heartfelt without, seeking attention or being ostentatious.
Exactly.
Now, what about Imam Malik? Does he have any specific opinions about how and when to make dua?
Well, he actually states that there is no harm in making dua during obligatory prayers.
Really? I always thought that the focus during those prayers was solely on, like, the prescribed recitations and movements.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
It is.
Imam Malik's view, it emphasizes that we can always turn to God,
Right?
seeking his guidance and blessings,
Yeah.
even within that structured framework of our formal prayers.
It's like weaving personal supplications into the fabric of our ritual obligations.
It is. It adds another layer of meaning and connection to our worship.
Now, if you're looking for, like, a beautiful example of a dua that encompasses so much of what we've been talking about, the Muwatta shares one that the Prophet himself used to say.
Ooh, which one is that?
He would ask God for three things: good actions, the strength to avoid wrongdoing, and love for the poor.
Wow, that's so powerful.
It's like a blueprint for a life lived in accordance with God's will.
It reminds us of the qualities that we should strive for as believers, acting righteously, resisting temptation, and showing compassion for those less fortunate.
It's a beautiful encapsulation of what it means to live a truly Islamic life.
It is.
Okay, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to revisit one last topic from the Muwatta: the prohibition of praying at certain times.
Okay.
which, it's something that might seem strange at first glance,
It can.
but I'm starting to appreciate the deeper reasoning behind it.
You're referring to that hadith about the horn of Satan rising with the sun, right?
That's the one, yeah.
Well,
And it's such a vivid image.
it is.
And it explains why the prophet forbade prayer during specific times, like sunrise and sunset.
It's not about the sun itself being bad or evil or anything.
Right.
It's about avoiding any resemblance to the sun worship.
Which is practiced by, the pre-Islamic Arabs.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that Islam is about pure monotheism, the worship of God alone.
Right.
And these prohibitions, they serve as a safeguard
They do.
against any practices that might even remotely hint at associating partners with God.
Right.
Now, the Muwatta also mentions a specific hadith condemning the prayer of hypocrites.
Oh, right. The ones who wait until the sun turns yellow to pray.
Yeah, that one.
That hadith speaks to the importance of sincerity in our worship.
Right.
Our actions should be driven by a genuine desire to please God.
Not to impress others or gain, social recognition.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how these seemingly small details
I know.
offer deeper insights into the principles and values
Yeah.
that underpin Islamic practice.
Yeah, right. It's about aligning our actions with our intentions and ensuring that our worship is a true reflection of our inner state.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
It really is. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening so far.
Yes.
We've covered so much ground.
I know, right? From the importance of approaching the Qur'an with respect and purity to understanding its revelation and its impact on the Prophet Muhammad.
We've explored the significance of internalizing its message, practical aspects like prostration and the etiquette of dua, and we've even delved into the world of deek and its power to connect us to the divine.
But there's still more to uncover.
That's right. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the remaining sections of Book 15, uncovering even more insights into the rich tapestry of Islamic tradition.
So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the wisdom and guidance found within the Muwatta Imam Malik.
Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we? Exploring this incredible book, the Muwatta Imam Malik.
It really is a treasure trove of insights into early Islamic practice.
Yeah, we've seen how those first generations of Muslims, how they interacted with the Qur'an, the meticulous care they took in handling it.
Right. And that deep reverence they felt while reciting its verses.
It wasn't just about reading the words, it was about internalizing that message, letting it really guide their lives.
Their approach to the Qur'an was so holistic.
It was.
It informed everything they did.
And we saw how that manifested, right?
Yeah, and everything from dhikr,
That constant remembrance of God to the heartfelt supplications of dua.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up our deep dive,
Okay.
there's one more aspect of Book 15 that I want to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
It's this idea of, the etiquette of making dua.
Oh, right.
It's not just about what we say, but how we say it.
That's so interesting.
I know I've always thought of dua as this, this deeply personal conversation with God.
Right.
But I never really considered that there might be specific guidelines for how to approach it.
It might seem surprising at first,
It does.
but when you really think about it, it
Yeah.
makes perfect sense.
It does.
Just like any other form of communication,
Right.
there are certain norms and practices
Yeah.
that help ensure respect,
Okay.
sincerity, and clarity.
So what kind of guidelines are we talking about here?
Well, one that stood out to me was Abdullah ibn Umar's advice against pointing with both fingers while making dua.
Wow, that's such a specific detail.
I know, it makes you wonder why, right?
Yeah, why would such a seemingly small gesture even be addressed?
Well, it all goes back to that idea of humility and reverence.
That's it.
When we're standing before God, our posture, our tone of voice, even our hand gestures, they should reflect the awe and respect that we feel.
So we're trying to embody that sense of, standing before the Almighty, the creator of all things, with our entire being.
Exactly.
And then there's that beautiful statement by Sayyid ibn al-Musayyab
Oh, yeah.
about a son's dua benefiting his deceased father.
Always gets me right in the feels.
It's so touching.
It is.
It speaks to, the enduring power of those family bonds.
Yeah, even beyond this life.
It's a reminder to remember our loved ones in our prayers
Absolutely.
and to recognize that, our actions can have this ripple effect that extends far beyond our own existence.
Yeah, I love that.
Now, the Muwatta also talks about the volume of our dua.
Oh, okay.
Should we whisper? Should we be loud? you know.
Right. What's the right approach?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is there a right way to make dua in terms of like how loud or soft our supplication should be?
Well, the Prophet Muhammad, he actually advised against being too loud or too silent in our du'as.
Oh, okay.
He emphasized finding that middle ground,
Mhm.
a balance between sincerity and discretion.
So it's not about shouting our prayers or
No,
mumbling them under our breath.
it's about finding that sweet spot where our hearts are fully engaged, but our actions aren't, drawing unnecessary attention to ourselves.
Right. It's about focusing on that connection with God,
Mm,
not on how we might appear to others.
exactly.
Now, what about Imam Malik? Does he have any specific opinions about this?
Well, he states that there's no harm in making dua during obligatory prayers.
Really? I always thought that those prayers were very structured, with the specific recitations and movements.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
So we can incorporate personal supplications as well.
Absolutely. Imam Malik's view emphasizes that we can always turn to God,
Mm.
seeking his guidance and blessings,
Yeah.
even within that structured framework of our formal worship.
So it's like weaving those personal conversations with God into the fabric of our ritual obligations.
It is.
It adds this whole other layer of meaning and depth to those prayers.
And I agree.
Now, the Muwatta actually shares a beautiful example
Okay.
of a dua that the Prophet Muhammad would often say.
Oh, I love this one.
It's so simple,
It is.
yet so profound.
What did he say?
He would ask God for three things: good actions, the strength to avoid wrongdoing, and love for the poor.
It's like a blueprint
It is.
for a life lived in accordance with God's will.
It touches on those core values of Islam:
Yeah.
acting righteously, resisting temptation, and showing compassion for those less fortunate.
Such a beautiful example of how dua can be both personal and universal.
Yeah.
Addressing our individual needs
Hmm.
while also connecting us to that broader human experience.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been a true journey of discovery. I feel like we've uncovered so much
we have.
about the early Muslims' relationship with the Qur'an and how their practices continue to resonate with us today.
From the reverence they showed in handling that physical text
Yeah.
to the ways they internalized its message and really integrated it into their lives, their approach it offers timeless wisdom
It,
for our own spiritual journeys.
it really does. So as you reflect on this deep dive, I want you to consider, how you approach the Qur'an in your own life.
What role does dhikr and dua play in your daily routine?
How can the stories and the rulings from the Muwatta inspire you to deepen your own connection with the Qur'an and its profound teachings,
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
and keep seeking knowledge?
Until next time, may the echoes of Ihsan continue to resonate within you.